The sounds of cries filled the community as sobs were even louder than screams. It was so early in the morning, but it felt like it was already the end of the day. As soon as the sun arose, the villagers all rushed to the house of Chief Obiora. The heartbreaking news left everyone in sorrow. Chief Obiora was no more. The news felt unbelievable but was true. The village women sat in the compound consoling the wives of the late chief. Cries could be heard everywhere, as everyone was either in pain or pretending to be. But in the midst of it all, Ngozi sat unmoved, unshaken, with no single tears in her eyes. She couldn't even try to pretend to be in pain, or force out meaningless tears like the other wives. She looked at everyone, not really understanding why they all were pretending to be in sorrow. Deep down she knew they didn't care. She was irritated by their act. The same women that wanted him to die are the same women telling him to come back to life. How annoying, she thought. When Ngozi could no longer take the stupidity in front of her eyes, she walked into her room and locked the door behind her. Ngozi was the 8th wife of late Chief Obiora, who had 10 wives. She was the only one out of all of his wives who never bore him a child. Several weeks passed, and the burial of late Chief Obiora was already around the corner. All of his wives were black and an even darker expression. But Ngozi didn't cry like the others, neither did she sob out loud. She didn't need the attention, neither did she feel the need to pretend. But unknown to her, that her nonchalant attitude towards her husband's death was beginning to raise a rumor amongst the villagers. Ngozi did not cry. Are you sure she is not the one that killed Chief Obiora? A tomato seller said in the local market to one of her usual customers. Exactly what I thought as well. Oh, I'm sure she is the one. Her customer replied with certainty. The rumor spread like wildfire across the community and everyone believed it. But Ngozi was innocent, completely innocent. Still she was labeled a killer. At first she didn't care about what the villagers said about her, because to her, she was used to the harsh treatment and hate from the villagers. But when her husband's family called her, demanding her to confess to a deed she never committed, she knew that it was something more serious than she had expected, and it might lead to her own death. Ngozi's life was not always like this, gloomy nor sad. In fact, she was the happiest girl in the village of Umuka, where she lived with her mother Chioma and her 2 sisters Nina and Kechi. Back then she was so cheerful, smiled the most, and always made jokes. She was goofy, free, and happy. She was the middle child of her mother. Nina was the first while Kechi the last. Her father was a rich farmer who had several other wives, and each wife owned an hut and lived separately from the others so peace would reign. Chioma, Ngozi's mother, was the definition of a perfect mother. She was always there for her daughters, showered them with love and care. Even though their father never showed them love, they did not feel less loved. But everything changed when Ngozi turned 8 years old. Her mother passed away before her very eyes. And the happy and loving life she once knew became worse than a nightmare. Ngozi and her sister started living with Mama Amoka, one of their father's wives who was known for her wickedness and ruthless nature. Ngozi and her sisters went through the unthinkable under the care of Mama Amoka, who cared less if they were alive or dead. From doing the chores, to running extra long errands, and being beaten for the slightest things that was not even their fault. The girls were basically servants in the house of Mama Amoka. The girls barely ate a day, did the chores and work in the house, while Amoka was treated like a princess. This was one of the worst times of Ngozi's life, as remembering this always left her in tears. One night, after doing all the chores, Ngozi and her sisters were outside staring at the stars while sitting down on a mat. The silence amongst them was louder than any voice you can imagine. Nina was the youngest, only 10 years old. She burst into tears while staring at the stars. Nkechi, who was the eldest, 13 years old, began to pray to the God her mother served. Chioma called her God Jesus. Ngozi could neither cry nor pray. She just looked at the stars with a feeling she could not explain. The next day something happened unexpectedly. A couple from the city came to the village of Umuka. They were getting old and all their children were overseas. They were looking for a child who would add more colors to their lives, because they were lonely. But the people of Umuka misunderstood their mission, thinking they wanted to take a child as a servant. So no parents were willing to give their children to them. Except Mama Amoka, who voluntarily gave Nkechi to them. As Nkechi left with the couple, Mama Amoka was so happy. To her, she had just sold the child to slavery. She kept smiling sheepishly while staring at the 1,000 naira notes on her palm. But to the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Okorocha, they had just adopted a new daughter whom they would love and care for. Ngozi went hawking and she was unaware that she was never going to see her elder sister again. When she returned home, she met Nina crying. "Nina, what happened?" Ngozi asked, already assuming that Mama Amoka had beaten her. It was until Nina explained to Ngozi about what had happened that Ngozi burst into tears as well. Nina and Ngozi cried for days because no one knew the couple nor where they came from. As if that was not enough, the worst happened. Uche Ngozi and Nina's father, the once famous rich farmer who had several wives, became poor with no single property to call his own. How it happened in the span of a few months, Uche could never explain. His polygamous family suffered greatly because he could not provide for them. Those of his wives, like Mama Amoka, who did not have a stable source of income, suffered much more than the others. Uche never asked Mama Amoka about Ngozi and her sisters, neither did he ever care about them. He was more interested in the sons than daughters. After a while, Uche reached out to his longtime friend, Chief Obiora, whose village was far away from Umuka. After explaining his situation to him, he begged Chief Obiora to borrow him a large sum of money so he could start again. On one condition. "You give me one of your daughters as a wife, then you can even forget about paying back the money," Chief Obiora said with lust in his eyes. Without a second thought, Uche agreed. He traveled back to his village, remembering Chief Obiора's last words. At least she should be 12 years old. Uche had only 2 daughters who were that exact age, Amoka and Ngozi. Of course, Mama Amoka refused, saying, "Chief Obiora is rich, I know, but he even older than you, Uche. Let us forget about his age and think about the large sum of money he will give to us as her bride price. That money is more than enough to start over." Uche replied with greed written all over his face. Mama Amoka smirked and said, Then we will give him Ngozi, after all she is 12 years old too." At that moment it was decided Ngozi was to marry a man who was old enough to be her grandfather. She was only 12 while he was almost 60. Nina cried even more as Ngozi left with her so-called husband. After that day, Ngozi's life had a drastic turn. Even when she was staying with Mama Amoka, she was happy as long as she was with her sisters, but now she was all alone in a new village. Being assaulted every night by her so-called husband, maltreated by her fellow wives, and discriminated by the villagers who harbor nothing but hatred towards her. Ngozi's heart did not only break, but she also lost herself to the point where she could no longer remember how happiness felt like nor recall how beautiful she looked while smiling. Everything felt meaningless in her eyes. She was happy when she couldn't bear a child for Chief Obiora, even though the villagers called her a barren witch who had eaten up her children. She didn't care because she knew she had no love to even give herself, not to talk about a child she would bring to this world, so she silently prayed to Jesus never to conceive. She didn't know what happened to either of her sisters. She missed them and prayed that they were safe. It had been 10 years since they were separated. After her husband's death, Ngozi was labeled the killer and her husband's family demanded her to confess to a deed she never committed. Ngozi defended herself and told the family she had no hand in her husband's death. The family sent her away, saying she'd take an oath to prove it to them in a few days. That night Ngozi sat on a mat outside her room staring at the stars. With tears in her eyes she said his name for the first time. "Jesus, if you are there, if you can hear me, help me." Though she had prayed to Jesus numerous times, this was the first time she had mentioned his name. The peace that only he brought overwhelmed her. She knew her life was in danger, but she was not afraid. Snapping her out of her thoughts, someone tapped her gently on her shoulders. Ngozi opened her eyes to see Adaze, one of her husband's wives, who always ignored her. She was the seventh wife of Chief Obiora. Looking around the compound, Adaze whispered to Ngozi, "You have to leave, run away as far as you can right now." Confused and shocked, Ngozi asked why. Adaze whispered again, "Keep your voice down." Looking around, she continues to speak. "Some of the wives have conspired against you, bearing false witness saying that they saw you poison our husband." Ngozi placed both of her hands in her mouth, not wanting to scream out loud. Adaze whispered again, "No matter how you tried to explain to our in-laws, they will not believe you, so run away while you still can." Fear gripped Ngozi as she quietly rushed into her room with Adaze tailing behind her. Ngozi was hesitant at first. "Are you sure?" she asked Adaze, doubting. Adaze only hissed and walked away without saying a thing. Ngozi didn't know when she started packing a few necessary things, neither did she realize when she sneaked out of the compound. The only thing she knew was something inside was pulling. She thought it was fear, but it was the Spirit of God. Ngozi ran as fast as she could, leaving her husband's village. She didn't know where she was going, but she kept running and running until she could no longer run and she fainted. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a different environment. Looking around, she found the room very beautiful and the house was also very beautiful. Though all of her body were sore, she managed to stand up on her feet. Confused and scared, she stares at the man who had saved her. The man gave her breakfast while gesturing for to sit down on the bed, which she did. After staring at her for a long time, he said, "My name Nelson Okorocha, Ngozi." Ngozi said with food in her mouth. Nelson chuckled and Ngozi blushed out of embarrassment. That day Ngozi felt something other than pain. Ngozi soon realized that she was in the village of Okpara, which was far away from both her father's village and husband's village. She felt a little relieved. Nelson actually worked and lived in Lagos, not Okpara, though he had a house there which he had built for his late parents before they died. He hardly came to Okpara and he told Ngozi that she could stay in the house for as long as she wanted. She was a stranger to him, but Nelson knew she meant no harm. He knew only her name, and to him that was enough. Nelson traveled back to Lagos after giving Ngozi some money. Ngozi was afraid of leaving the house. She thought the villagers of Okpara were going to treat her badly too. It wasn't until there was no food in the house, and she had no choice but to go to the market. To her greatest surprise, she was treated kindly and appreciated by the villagers. And from that day Ngozi loved coming out more often, gisting with her neighbors and laughing at different children's character. She didn't realize that she had begun to smile again. Even with the happiness that surrounded her new life, she could not help but yearn to see and be with her sisters once again, and she prayed in her heart to reunited with them one day. To be continued in part 2. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification button to notified whenever I post a new video. Thank you.